There's a rule so radical, so terrifying, so completely contrary to everything modern society teaches about success and happiness that even people who study Stoicism refuse to follow it. But the few who have the courage to live by this rule become untouchable, unbreakable, and unstoppable in ways that seem almost supernatural to those still playing by conventional rules. This isn't just another philosophical concept you can intellectualize and forget. This is a complete transformation of how you move through the world, how you make decisions, how you relate to other people, and how you define what matters in life. The rule is so simple that you can understand it in seconds, but so demanding that most people will spend their entire lives running from its implications rather than embracing its power. Ancient Stoics who followed this rule became legendary not because they achieved more than others, but because they became immune to the forces that control and manipulate everyone else. The need for approval, the fear of loss, the desire for comfort, the attachment to outcomes. But here's the warning that comes with this knowledge. Once you truly understand this rule and begin living by it, there's no going back to the comfortable illusions that make ordinary life bearable for those who choose weakness over wisdom. This rule will isolate you from people who mistake your strength for coldness, separate you from activities that once seemed important but reveal themselves as distractions, and force you to confront the terrifying reality of what it means to be completely free in a world designed to keep people enslaved by their own desires and fears. If you're ready to discover the one Stoic rule that no one dares to follow, but changes absolutely everything about how you experience life, power, and freedom, smash that like button. Share this forbidden wisdom with someone brave enough to handle the truth. Comment below about what you're most afraid to let go of, and subscribe to this channel for more hidden knowledge that will transform you into someone who cannot be controlled by anyone or anything external. Marcus Aurelius wrote this rule in his private meditations, never intending for anyone else to read it, which is why it remains hidden in plain sight even today. Be like the rocky headland on which the waves constantly break. It stands firm, and round it the seething waters are laid to rest. But the rule itself is buried deeper in what he wrote next. I will not say that old age brings that which is best, but I will say it brings that which is most needed, the ability to want nothing. The rule that no one dares to follow is this: want nothing. Not want less, not want better things, not want more strategically, but want absolutely nothing that you don't already have. This sounds impossible because it is impossible for people who still believe that happiness comes from acquisition. Success comes from achievement, and security comes from accumulation. But for those rare individuals who discover how to genuinely want nothing, the entire game of life changes because they're no longer playing by the same rules as everyone else. The reason no one dares to follow this rule is because wanting nothing seems like giving up everything, surrendering all ambition, abandoning all hope for a better future, accepting mediocrity and defeat. But this is the illusion that keeps people trapped in cycles of desire, disappointment, and dependency. The person who wants nothing isn't giving up power. They're accessing a type of power that people driven by wants can never understand. The power of complete independence from external circumstances. The power of making decisions based on wisdom rather than desire. The power of being unmanipulable because there's nothing you want that others can promise or threaten to take away. Let me tell you about James, a man who accidentally discovered this rule through the total destruction of everything he thought he wanted. James was a real estate mogul who had built a fortune buying and selling properties across multiple states. He had the mansion, the luxury cars, the private jet, the beautiful wife, the respect of peers, everything that society defines as success. But James was driven by an insatiable hunger for more. More properties, more money, more status, more recognition. His wanting was like a fire that consumed everything he fed it, but only grew larger and more demanding. Then the 2008 financial crisis hit, and James's world collapsed in a matter of months. The properties became worthless overnight. The debt became crushing. The wife left for someone with stable finances. The friends disappeared when the money ran out. And James found himself not just broke, but owing millions to creditors who were threatening legal action. At 55 years old, James had lost everything he had spent 30 years building, everything he had defined himself by, everything he thought made life worth living. The pain wasn't just financial, it was existential. If he wasn't a successful real estate mogul, then who was he? For the first year after his collapse, James was consumed by wanting to get back what he had lost. He wanted his money back, his status back, his wife back, his old life back. This wanting was torture because it reminded him constantly of what he no longer had, made every present moment a source of suffering because it wasn't the past he had lost or the future he desired. James was trapped in a prison of his own desires, tormented by the gap between what he wanted and what he actually had, which was essentially nothing. Then something extraordinary happened. James was sitting in his cheap studio apartment, eating a simple meal of rice and beans, and suddenly realized that he wasn't suffering in that moment. He wasn't happy exactly, but he wasn't in pain either. He was just sitting, eating, existing without the constant mental torture of wanting something different. For the first time in years, James experienced a moment of peace. Not because he had gotten what he wanted, but because for just a few minutes, he had stopped wanting anything at all. That moment of accidental peace showed James something revolutionary. His suffering hadn't been caused by losing his wealth. It had been caused by wanting his wealth back. The loss itself was just a fact, neutral and powerless to create emotional pain. But his wanting was what transformed that neutral fact into psychological torture. James began to experiment with deliberately not wanting things, not wanting his old life back, not wanting revenge on those who had betrayed him, not wanting financial security, not wanting others' approval, not wanting anything other than what was actually present in each moment. The transformation was immediate and profound. Without the constant mental noise of wanting, James could think more clearly than he had in decades. Without the emotional drain of desire, he had energy he had forgotten existed. Without the need to get anything from anyone, he could interact with people authentically instead of strategically. Without the fear of losing what he wanted, he could take risks that would have terrified him when he had something to protect. James discovered that wanting nothing didn't make him passive or unmotivated. It made him unstoppable because he was no longer paralyzed by the fear of not getting what he wanted or losing what he had. Within 3 years, James had built a new business that was more successful than his previous empire, but his relationship with success was completely different. He wasn't building wealth because he wanted wealth. He was building wealth because the activities that created wealth were interesting and challenging. He wasn't seeking status because he wanted recognition. He was achieving recognition as a natural result of focusing on excellence rather than outcomes. James had discovered the paradox that drives people crazy. The less you want something, the more likely you are to get it. Because wanting creates desperation, and desperation repels the very things you're trying to attract. This is why the rule, "want nothing," seems impossible to follow. It appears to go against every instinct we have about motivation and achievement. We've been taught that wanting things is what drives us to work harder, try harder, achieve more. But the Stoics understood that wanting is actually what makes us weaker, not stronger. When you want something desperately, you make decisions from a place of neediness rather than strength. When you want approval, you say what others want to hear rather than what you believe is true. When you want security, you avoid risks that could lead to growth. When you want comfort, you choose the easy path that keeps you weak. Seneca proved this principle when he voluntarily gave up his vast wealth for extended periods, living as a poor man to demonstrate that his happiness didn't depend on his possessions. But Seneca's practice went deeper than just material detachment. He wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." Seneca understood that poverty isn't about how much you have, it's about how much you want. The person who wants nothing is rich regardless of their circumstances, while the person who wants constantly is poor regardless of their possessions. Let me share the story of Maria, a woman who discovered this rule through the pursuit of love. Maria had spent her entire adult life wanting to be loved, wanting to find the perfect relationship, wanting to be chosen by someone special. This wanting drove every decision she made about how to dress, where to go, what to say, who to become. Maria shaped herself into what she thought men wanted rather than discovering who she actually was. And the result was a series of relationships with people who were attracted to her performance rather than her authentic self. The relationships never lasted because Maria was exhausting herself trying to maintain a persona designed to be wanted rather than living as someone worth knowing. Her wanting made her needy, her neediness made her unattractive, and her unattractiveness made her want even more desperately. Maria was trapped in a cycle where the very thing she was doing to get love was preventing her from receiving love. But she couldn't see the pattern because her wanting had become so intense it clouded her judgment completely. Then Maria's heart was broken so completely by someone she had wanted desperately that she reached a point of total exhaustion with wanting. She was tired of analyzing every text message, tired of wondering if she was pretty enough, smart enough, interesting enough, tired of the constant internal soundtrack of desire and disappointment. Maria made a radical decision. She would stop wanting to be loved and focus on becoming someone worth loving, not for others, but for herself. The shift was transformative. Instead of asking, "What do I need to do to be wanted?" Maria began asking, "Who do I want to become?" Instead of trying to figure out what men liked, she started discovering what she enjoyed. Instead of seeking validation from others, she began developing self-respect based on her own values and standards. Maria stopped going to places she didn't enjoy hoping to meet someone, stopped pretending to like things she didn't actually like, stopped agreeing with opinions she didn't share just to be agreeable. The result was counterintuitive, but predictable. The moment Maria stopped wanting love desperately, she became the kind of person who naturally attracts genuine love. Without the desperate energy of neediness, she became more attractive. Without the anxiety of wanting approval, she became more confident. Without the fear of rejection, she became more authentic. Maria discovered that the very wanting that she thought was motivating her to find love was actually the obstacle preventing her from receiving love. But Maria's transformation went deeper than just romantic relationships. When she stopped wanting others' approval, she became immune to manipulation and social pressure. When she stopped wanting security guarantees, she became willing to take risks that led to better opportunities. When she stopped wanting life to be different than it was, she began to appreciate what she actually had. Maria had stumbled upon the ultimate Stoic secret. Wanting is the source of suffering, and not wanting is the source of power. Epictetus, who had lived as a literal slave before becoming one of the greatest teachers of freedom, understood this rule more deeply than perhaps any other Stoic. He had experienced what it meant to want freedom while being physically enslaved, and he discovered that true freedom had nothing to do with external circumstances and everything to do with internal wanting. Epictetus wrote, "Wealth consists in not having great possessions, but in having few wants." But his deeper teaching was that the person who wants nothing cannot be enslaved by anyone, because there's nothing you can offer them or threaten to take away that would control their behavior. This is the terrifying implication of the rule that no one dares to follow. When you genuinely want nothing, you become uncontrollable. You can't be bribed because there's nothing you want enough to compromise your principles. You can't be threatened because there's nothing you're attached to that could be taken away. You can't be manipulated through promises or fears because you're not driven by the desires and anxieties that make most people predictable. You become dangerous to systems that depend on people's wants and fears to maintain control. Let me tell you about David, a man who discovered this rule in the corporate world. David was a mid-level manager at a large corporation, constantly wanting promotion, wanting recognition, wanting his boss's approval, wanting his colleagues' respect. These wants made him easy to manipulate. He would work unpaid overtime because he wanted to be seen as dedicated. He would agree with bad decisions because he wanted to be seen as a team player. He would avoid speaking up about problems because he wanted to be seen as positive and cooperative. David's wanting had trapped him in a career that was slowly destroying his health, his family relationships, and his self-respect. But he couldn't break free because he wanted security more than he wanted integrity. Then David's company was acquired, and the new management made it clear that his position would be eliminated regardless of how hard he worked or how much he wanted to keep his job. David's wanting had been revealed as completely powerless to control his circumstances. In that moment of recognizing the futility of his desires, David experienced something like enlightenment. He realized that his wanting hadn't been motivating him to succeed. It had been motivating him to accept mediocrity out of fear of losing what he thought he wanted. David made a decision that shocked everyone around him. He stopped wanting the promotion, stopped wanting his boss's approval, stopped wanting job security, and started making decisions based on what he believed was right, rather than what he thought would get him what he wanted. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Without the fear of losing what he wanted, David began speaking truthfully in meetings, pointing out problems that needed addressing, suggesting solutions that might be unpopular but were necessary. Without the need for approval, David stopped working unpaid overtime and started setting boundaries about his availability. Without the attachment to his position, David began taking risks and showing leadership that he had never demonstrated when he was afraid of jeopardizing what he wanted to keep. Paradoxically, David's willingness to lose everything made him invaluable. His honesty made him trusted by upper management who were tired of people telling them what they wanted to hear. His boundaries made him respected by colleagues who had grown accustomed to being exploited. His risk-taking led to innovations that saved the company significant money. Within a year, David had been promoted twice, not because he wanted advancement, but because his lack of wanting had revealed capabilities that his previous neediness had kept hidden. But David's story illustrates the deeper principle. The rule, want nothing, doesn't mean become passive or unambitious. It means become active and ambitious from a place of strength rather than neediness. When you want nothing, you can choose everything based on wisdom rather than desperation. You can take risks because you're not afraid of losing what you're attached to. You can be generous because you're not hoarding what you think you need. You can be honest because you don't need others' approval to feel valuable. Marcus Aurelius demonstrated this principle in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Ruling an empire while following the rule of wanting nothing. Marcus could have used his power to satisfy any desire, accumulate any pleasure, avoid any discomfort. Instead, he used his power to serve the greater good while wanting nothing for himself personally. This wasn't because Marcus was naturally selfless. It was because he understood that personal wanting would make him weak and corruptible, while wanting nothing would make him wise and incorruptible. The emperor wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate associates you." But the deeper meaning is that acceptance eliminates the wanting that creates suffering. And without suffering, you have the emotional energy to love authentically rather than strategically. Marcus could love his people because he didn't want anything from them. He could make difficult decisions because he wasn't attached to being liked. He could face death calmly because he wasn't clinging to life desperately. This is the ultimate test of the rule. Are you willing to want nothing even when it comes to life itself? The Stoics practiced memento mori, remembering death, not to become morbid, but to release attachment to continuing to exist. When you don't even want to stay alive desperately, you become free to live authentically, to take meaningful risks, to stand for principles that might be dangerous, to love people without trying to possess them, to create things without needing them to last forever. Let me share the final story about Rebecca, a woman who discovered this rule through the loss of her child. Rebecca's 6-year-old daughter died in a car accident, and the grief was so overwhelming that Rebecca thought she would never recover. For months, Rebecca wanted nothing except to have her daughter back, and this wanting was torture because it focused all her attention on the gap between what she had and what she desired, which was impossible to bridge. Rebecca tried everything to manage her grief: therapy, medication, support groups, spiritual practices, anything to reduce the pain of wanting her daughter back. But nothing worked because the wanting itself was the source of the pain, not the loss. The loss was a fact that had already happened, but the wanting was an ongoing choice that Rebecca was making every moment, a choice that kept the wound fresh and prevented any possibility of healing. Then Rebecca had a realization that seemed almost sacrilegious to admit. She could choose to stop wanting her daughter back. Not because she didn't love her daughter, but because the wanting was preventing her from honoring her daughter's memory in meaningful ways. The wanting kept Rebecca focused on what was gone rather than what remained, on what she had lost rather than what she had learned, on her own pain rather than her daughter's legacy. When Rebecca stopped wanting her daughter back and started appreciating the 6 years they had shared, everything changed. Instead of focusing on the relationship that had ended, she could celebrate the relationship that had existed. Instead of wanting to change the past, she could choose to influence the future in ways that honored her daughter's memory. Instead of being paralyzed by grief, she became motivated by love to help other families avoid similar tragedies. Rebecca's transformation wasn't about getting over her loss or moving on from grief. It was about discovering that love doesn't require wanting, that honoring someone's memory doesn't require wishing they were still alive, and that the deepest peace comes from accepting what is rather than wanting what isn't. Rebecca had found the ultimate expression of the rule: wanting nothing, including wanting life to be different than it is, which is the gateway to finding meaning and purpose within whatever life actually presents. This is why the rule, want nothing, changes everything. It transforms you from someone who is constantly at war with reality into someone who is constantly at peace with reality. And that peace isn't passive or resigned. It's active and powerful. When you're not wasting energy wanting things to be different, you have all your energy available for responding wisely to things as they are. When you're not distracted by desires for what you don't have, you can fully appreciate and utilize what you do have. When you're not attached to outcomes, you can take actions based on principles rather than calculations. The Stoics who followed this rule became legendary not because they achieved more than others, but because they became free from the wanting that makes most people miserable, manipulable, and weak. They discovered that the ultimate luxury isn't having everything you want, it's wanting nothing you don't have. They found that the highest power isn't the ability to get what you want, it's the ability to be content regardless of what you get. They learned that the greatest strength isn't overcoming obstacles to reach your desires. It's having no desires that obstacles can prevent you from reaching. When you genuinely want nothing, every moment becomes perfect, because there's nothing about it that needs to be different. Every person becomes acceptable because you're not wanting them to be other than they are. Every experience becomes valuable because you're not comparing it to some preferred alternative. Every outcome becomes fine because you weren't attached to a different result. This isn't resignation or defeat. This is the ultimate victory, winning the only game that matters by refusing to play games where winning depends on factors outside your control. The rule that no one dares to follow transforms everything, because it reveals that happiness was never about getting what you want. It was always about wanting what you get. And the fastest way to want what you get is to stop wanting what you don't get. This is the secret that makes Stoics unbreakable. Not that they're tougher than others, but that they've eliminated the attachments that make others fragile. They can't be disappointed because they don't expect specific outcomes. They can't be threatened because they're not clinging to anything that can be taken away. And they can't be controlled because there's nothing they want enough to compromise their principles to obtain.